Hey friends, I have been wanting to do a video on emergency preparedness for a long time now. I imagine most of you have probably seen at least something about the destruction that Hurricane Helene has left in the Southeast. I've lived in North Carolina for over half my life, and a lot of those years were spent living in the mountains. So the destruction in Western North Carolina is particularly hitting home for me. I have a lot of places and a lot of people there who are very close to my heart, so it's been a very anxious and sad weekend. I have finally heard from most of my friends though. Today is Tuesday and a couple of them I just finally heard from today. If you're not really familiar with the level of destruction that has occurred out there, they're using words like catastrophic and biblical to describe it, and it is not an exaggeration. There are still hundreds of thousands of people without power. A lot of people don't have water. Roads are still impassable. People can't get a hold of their family and friends. It is a really horrible situation. So the first thing I want to do is encourage anyone who has the means and the desire to please donate to an organization that is helping out there. I'm gonna leave some of the ones that I've donated to listed in my description, probably a couple more. Or if you have your own favorite organization, there are so many that are jumping into action, doing really great work to help people. And then the second thing that I'm gonna encourage y'all, even beg y'all to do, if you do not have an emergency plan yet, if you haven't thought about it, or if you've thought about it and you haven't done any of the prep work yet, I'm begging you, please start that today. Nobody thinks that they're gonna be in a once-in-a-lifetime catastrophic environmental disaster until they are. And even if you don't think that you would ever become the victim of an environmental disaster, there are other scenarios where having an emergency kit could definitely come into play. I'm not talking about hardcore prepping, end of the world, collapse of society style prepping. I wanna talk about everyday, budget-friendly prepping that I think everybody should have. I'm sure some people watching this will have a whole pantry full of canned goods and a home generator and all of these things, but I want to talk about things that people who live in an apartment could benefit from, or someone who has no emergency kit right now and they can't drop hundreds of dollars on a generator. So I'm going to share my kit with you, and just remember that you should personalize this to what works for you and your scenario. Because my content primarily focuses on eating on a budget, that's mostly what I'm going to focus on for this emergency preparedness video. This is the bin that I keep my emergency food supply in. It just lives all year in a closet at the end of my hall. And about every 6 months, I go through it and I rotate out anything that is going to be going bad in the next 6 months, and I exchange it with newer items from my pantry if I have it already, or I put it on my shopping list to look for those things on sale, or some of them are just cheap as it is, and replace them into here. Nowadays I buy flour and rice and dried beans in bulk, and I have a pretty well-stocked freezer, so if I was in a situation where I was without power for like a week or whatever, I wouldn't necessarily need to dip into this. But when I originally started, it was at a time in my life when money was very, very tight. And so one of my concerns was, if I lost my job, would I have enough to eat? And so that was where I originally kind of started collecting food, was in case of an economic downturn for myself. And despite having a lot of extra food in the house, that's still one of the reasons I keep an emergency food supply. I never know when I could go through some type of major personal financial crisis due to illness or injury or something like that. You never know if something crazy is going to happen with the economy, or thinking back to 2020, there were a few weeks there where a lot of items on shelves were hard to find. So this small bin gives me a lot of comfort for a lot of different scenarios. So as I get into the things that are in here, I want to remind you that I mentioned building a plan that is personalized to you. I think that an economic crisis is something that can affect anyone, but otherwise the two possibilities that I especially prepare for living where I am at in Raleigh, North Carolina, are hurricanes and ice storms. I've never lost power for more than a day while I've been living in Raleigh, but within my lifetime there have been both hurricanes and ice storms that have hit Raleigh, and my friends talk about, who have lived here their entire lives, have talked about being without power for up to 2 weeks during these events. These are also events that bring down a lot of trees, a lot of power lines, and create a scenario where the safest thing to do is to just stay in your home. Like I said, I've already gone through and rotated out older items. You can see there's a little bit of space in here, so there are a few more things that I have on my grocery list to pick up. So I'm gonna get these things out, and then I'll explain my reasoning for kind of the different categories of things. This is what that food looks like out of the bin. In an actual situation where I was self-reliant on what I already have in my house, this would be a supplement to the things that I already have. In a power out scenario, I would be going through the most perishable items in my fridge first, meats, soft cheeses, yogurts, that kind of thing. And then the next day, I probably would be cooking whatever foods from my freezer that I would be most sad to have to throw out. A lot of things from the fridge would still be fine to eat, namely hard cheeses, most of my condiments, fruits and veggies, those kind of things. Then I would pull things from my regular pantry first, and then I would move into this stuff. One of the big things to consider for your emergency kit is what is your water situation gonna be and what is your cooking situation gonna be. Those are really gonna determine what kind of foods you should be including in your emergency food kit. If you have a living situation where access to water is not gonna be an issue for you, then you have a lot more choices than, say, some of my friends in the mountains who don't have any running water and likely will not for the foreseeable future. It's always a good idea to store extra water, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but sometimes your living scenario means you can't have more than a few gallons at best. I have a lot of friends who live in small apartments, and if that's your situation, you're really gonna wanna focus on having access to lots of foods that you don't have to use water to cook. Which also brings me to the topic of cooking. If you don't have a way of cooking meals, then that also limits your options, and you're going to keep that in mind when you select foods. So everything that's here are items that don't actually have to be cooked. Things like Chef Boyardee are gonna taste better if you can heat them up, but if that's not an option, you can just pop the lid off the can and eat them out the can. I've done it before. The same is true for canned beans, canned fruits and veggies. Packets and cans of tuna, chicken, and other meats are great to have, and they tend to last a really long time. One of the items that I'm rotating out of my storage, but that I have not picked up again because I didn't see it as Aldi, are these cans of beef stew. Same thing, I would very much rather heat this up to eat, but in an emergency scenario, I could get away with not doing it, and from a water perspective, I don't need to have any water to eat this. Other items, some of which are on my list to buy, are things like peanut butter, shelf-stable cheeses. If you've ever gotten a Hickory Farms gift box, it's that style of cheese where it is shelf-stable, it's wrapped in plastic. It doesn't need to be refrigerated until after you open it, and even then, hard cheeses will last quite a bit before they go bad outside of the fridge. Also, summer sausages, pepperoni, smoked salmon, trail mix, protein bars. It's definitely on my list to get peanut butter and protein bars to add to this assortment of items, but because I'm much less likely to find myself in a situation where I don't have access to water, and because I have multiple methods of cooking should I be without power, this is kind of like my smallest category, if you will. Here's my next category, which is kind of the big category for me, and these are foods that need to be cooked and do need water to make, but that are relatively easy to cook, quick to cook, and don't have huge water requirements. With the exception of these, I probably could have included these in that last category. These can be heated up by just putting the pouch into a pot of boiling water for a few minutes. What's really awesome about that is that you can heat this up and then use that boiling water for something else, perhaps to make another part of the meal. In terms of cooking, I know a lot of people have gas stoves, and if the power goes out, they still have full capability to cook on their stovetops. For me, my mom and I really love camping. I love backpacking, so we have several different options for different styles of camp stoves. I'll put on the screen what I think is the most easy and beginner friendly camp stove for someone who is not super familiar or comfortable with that kind of thing. They take these propane fuel canisters, which aren't very expensive, and if you're cooking things that, you're basically boiling water or need to be boiled for very short amounts of time, one of these canisters would easily last several days. Reminder that if you use a camp stove, you do need to have a space outside to use it, even if it's just a back patio or a balcony. We also have a grill that we can use to cook, and I always make sure to have a full propane tank. So I have whichever one is attached to the grill that we're currently using, and then I have a spare, and I make sure that that is always full. For an emergency kit, I especially like to have rice that cooks very quickly. So either the boil and bag rice or the minute rice. I like the instant mashed potatoes because you just need to boil a little bit of water, very low water needs and very quick cook time. I really like the rice sides because they don't require a lot of water. They don't need to be drained, and depending on the flavors you get, all they require is a little bit of oil, and even that's optional. I have this little container of olive oil that I got from the Dollar Tree. I think what I'm gonna do in the future is just use a little food safe container and just put regular vegetable oil from my pantry in it. I have a very small, cheap container of bouillon, the ramen packs, because they are quick and easy to make. Stuffing mix also is quick and easy to make. You don't need to drain any of the liquid. And then I have several different types of spaghetti and pasta. And then my third category is what I would consider to be more like either longer term survival or economic survival. These are things that, in terms of the space that they take up in my bin, the cost, and then how many servings once cooked they provide, make them good staples to have in that bin. If I was stuck in my house for a week with no power, these probably aren't the things that I would turn to. But if for some reason I couldn't grocery shop for a month, these would provide so many servings of food. The final category of items in my emergency bin is what I call the comfort category. That's where I have instant coffee, chocolate, bottle of wine, because if our power is out for more than a couple days, we need a bottle of wine. As we're going into winter, it's on my grocery list to pick up a box of hot chocolate to put in here. You could also do teas, different flavored drink mixes, just something that'll make you feel good in a sucky situation. And then sometimes the expiration date on chocolate does not go super far out, so just remember to make sure to check that. These ones are supposed to be good till September 2025, and in all reality, I will likely change these out with something fresher in March or April when I go through this again. The more money you have to put into an emergency kit, obviously, the more options you have. It also opens up options like MREs, backpacking meals, pre-organized kits that come in 5-gallon buckets, certain types of dehydrated foods that just cost a little more or are a little harder to get. But I really focused on the budget part of my emergency kit, and I think that makes it really accessible to a lot of people. I didn't originally build my emergency kit all at once. I just spent a few dollars here and there each grocery trip, and now I pick things up when I see them on sale or on clearance, always checking those expiration dates, of course, or I buy things that are on sale. I also stick to things that I like, and that makes it a lot easier to rotate things into my pantry and use them up as they get closer to their best by date and replace them with things that I already have in my pantry. That kind of thing is especially true of the different canned items. There's definitely a much larger variety of canned items I could have, but I just stick to the ones that are easy to cook with and that I like. Things like the instant rice here, I got it when these were marked down to $1.12 a box. All of these tuna packets were 75 cents a pack or less on closeout. I got this pasta at Aldi last year after Christmas. It was like 35 cents a pack, and the best by date isn't until sometime in 2026. These are all items I picked up from the Dollar Tree. Not everything at the Dollar Tree is a great deal. For example, I get these cans of tomatoes and beans at my regular grocery store when they're on sale for 50 cents a piece. But there are certain items that are excellent for emergency kits that are a really good value there. And if buying enough extra food to fill a whole bin sounds really daunting, just focus on 24 hours at first, then work your way up to 72 hours, and then a week's worth of food. Even if you can only spend $1 or $2 per grocery trip, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need it, you'll be happy you have it. And if you do what I do, and go through it every 6 months and rotate things out, you're not losing any money because you're still consuming all the items. It's all going back into your regular food rotation. Other items that I don't have in my emergency kit just because of preference, but that I think are great for an emergency kit, are instant oatmeal, powdered milk, instant grits or cream of wheat, dried soup mixes, canned soups, canned chilies, dried fruit. And I'm sure y'all have plenty of other ideas. I would love to hear them in the comments. For some ideas on what kind of dinners I would actually make with these items. So for example, I would cook some minute rice, heat up one of these chili pouches, which claim that they are 3 servings per container, and I'd mix in a can of beans with the chili because this chili doesn't include any beans, and that would help bulk it out. Another idea is I would make Spanish rice, add a can of beans, maybe a can of tomatoes as well. A box of mac and cheese with a couple packets of the flavored tuna would be another meal. And then instant mashed potatoes with any kind of canned beef stew or soup that would taste good served over mashed potatoes would be another one. For water, we don't keep a whole lot of bottled water. Just given our city's water system, it's very unlikely that we would lose access to water. I do keep several gallons in gallon jugs, and we rotate them out when we go camping. I also have these 5-gallon collapsible cubes. I'll put that up on the screen here. If it's a big enough storm that I do have any concerns about maintaining access to our water source, I'll fill these up before the storm. And if I don't end up needing that water, no big deal. Once they're empty, They can be dried out, collapsed back down, and stored away. If I was ever really in a pinch, I would filter water from my rain barrels. I mentioned I like backpacking, so I have a couple different ways of filtering water. And I have 2 large rain barrels that I usually use for my garden over the summer. But definitely consider your own situation and how much bottled water you do or don't need to have on hand. The official recommendation is usually a gallon per person per day. It may not be realistic to keep 40 gallons of water in a small apartment to cover a family of 4 or 5 for a week, but having something is definitely better than having nothing. And like I said, I love these cubes because you can fill them up ahead of a storm just in case, and the rest of the time they take up no room. And then it's definitely debatable how budget friendly this is. I do have a Jackery. I think this is the smallest one or second smallest. I can't remember. I put it on my Christmas list one year. For those who don't know what this is, it's basically a portable power bank. We mainly use it camping, but if the power is out, it also gives us a means to charge our phones and use other small electronic devices. It can't run any kind of large appliances, anything that has a high wattage, but it can charge phones and small devices, charge small fans, that kind of thing. I believe you can recharge this via your car. And they also have a solar panel that you can lay out, and that'll charge this back up. I don't have the solar panel yet, but it's definitely something I would like to try out someday. A couple months ago, we had our power and our cell service randomly go out one night. It only lasted like an hour, but it felt very isolating. And even now, most of my friends in the mountains have very spotty cell service after having access to nothing for several days. So one of the things that I went out and got at the thrift store, it says $5 on it, but I actually spent $1 on it, is just a little radio. It also has an alarm, but I didn't buy it for that feature. It was just one of the most compact radios that I could cheaply buy. It runs on battery, or I can also plug it into the Jackery and run it on that.
Folks out in Swannanoa. I'm told that they're trying to get a helicopter out to you guys to bring goods. They just need somewhere to land their helicopter, so out there is able to clear 100 by 100 square foot area, mark it with an X with wood, whatever you have that's needed to get goods out to you. Thanks.
So yeah, definitely a way to listen to music so that way it doesn't have to be silent, and to keep connected with potentially really important news. And one last thing as I wrap this up is don't forget about your pets. We unfortunately had to put my cat down about 1.5 months, 2 months ago. So I can't show you his prep because I've already donated the food. But basically what I did is I stored it in his carrier. I had a small bag of dried cat food and then like 2 weeks worth of the canned food that he likes to eat. And then same thing as I've been saying the whole time, pay attention to expiration dates and rotate it out with, in our case, we just rotated it out with his regular supply of food. So obviously this was really just brushing the surface of preparedness, and there are other creators out there who can go into way more detail and explain everything much more eloquently than I can. My main purpose in making this video was just to encourage the people who haven't thought about it, haven't started making any kind of kit for themselves, to really take it seriously. Hopefully it's something that just sits in a closet, a pantry, someplace that you never need to use it. But if for any reason you ever do, you'll have the security of having it there. Thank y'all so much for watching. If any of you are managing to watch this from one of the areas that was hit by the hurricane, y'all are so in my thoughts right now. Stay safe, and I will see y'all again soon.